Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see and hear me. My name is Elizabeth Rogers, and I'm very glad to welcome you this morning to the Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland webinar on measuring the value and the impact of trails and green space. People are just joining in with us. I can see lots of people just joining in as I speak. So I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction and housekeeping, and then we'll get into the real meaty part of the webinar. So as I said, this webinar is going to look at how we value and how we measure the impact of trails and green space. And over the last 16 months, the importance of trails and green space, particularly for our health and well-being, has never been so apparent. And I think going forward, it's important that as a sector, we do our best to ensure that trails and green space remain high on the agenda and that they receive the investment that they require. And so it's important that as a sector, we can quantify the impact and the value they bring and communicate this in a way that's impactful, particularly to policymakers. So in this webinar, we're going to share the work that we have been doing in collaboration with 56 Degree Insight. So there's three key areas we want to cover today. So first area is an overview of the pilot work that we've completed. And then we want to take you through a walkthrough of the social return on investment model. And then we want to tell you about the toolkit that's being developed and how that may be used by organisations. So that's just a bit of an introduction. Just to say that as you're joining us, if you could just mute yourselves and ensure that you've got your camera turned off, that will just help with bandwidth. Often if we're sharing presentations and we've got lots of cameras on, it's just difficult for people to have a seamless broadcast. So by turning off your cameras and muting yourselves during the main presentations, that will just ensure that we've got a seamless broadcast this morning. So just a few other housekeeping rules. Just to say that this is being recorded. So if you don't want to be seen on the recording that will go online afterwards, just ensure that you've got your camera turned on. We have lots of participants today. I think the best way for us to see what questions would like to be raised in the discussion time is for you to use the chat pane. So if you look to the top right, you will see the little chat icon. You can use that to ask questions or to make comments. And what I would perhaps encourage you to do today is whenever you put in a question or you see someone else's question that you think is quite pertinent, if you give that a thumbs up, that helps us to see which questions we should ask during the discussion period at the end. So I would just encourage you to use that. And then during the end of today's webinar, there will be time also for discussion through raising your virtual hand. So do use those functions, do use the chat and do raise your virtual hand. So in terms of the running order, I'm going to give a bit of context to why we thought it would be good to develop the impact survey, a little bit of background to that, and how we have collaborated with 56 Degree Insight for this work. And then I'm going to hand over to Duncan from 56 Degree Insight, Duncan Stewart, and he is going to give an overview of the approach and how it was developed in terms of the methodology, and then take you through a walkthrough of the social return on investment framework and how we've applied that. And then I'll hand back to myself to go through some of the results from our pilot work and then talk about future plans going forward. And then finally we'll have some discussion. So just in terms of who you're going to be listening to today. So my name is Elizabeth Rogers. I'm a project officer here at Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland. And my main projects focus around research and training. So I head up our training programme, which includes these webinars that we deliver to the Northern Ireland outdoor recreation sector. And then I also head up the training that we provide through the Outdoor Recreation Network and the Visitor Safety Group. And those are Ireland and UK-wide networks. I'm going to bring in Duncan at this point to introduce himself. So Duncan, do you want to say a little bit about your background?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's Duncan Stewart. I'm managing partner at 56 Degree Insight. We're a small market research consultancy, but we specialise in undertaking research and evaluations relating to outdoor recreation, tourism, sport, leisure and related areas, the natural environment generally. So yeah, I've been delighted to be working with outdoor recreation Northern Ireland on a few different pieces of work, including a large population survey of the Northern Ireland population as well, which you may well have seen the results emerging from as well, and that's providing valuable context to all of this at that sort of population level, but also worked with organisations such as SNH in Scotland, Natural England in England, the National Trust and so on projects related to this. So very much hoping that bringing that experience to this piece of work, and looking forward to presenting to you in a moment.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Duncan. And it has been great to work in collaboration. We work in collaboration with 56 Degree Insight on multiple research projects, and you will see in a few minutes' time just the expertise that they were able to bring to the sector. Just a reminder for those joining us late, if you could just turn off your cameras and ensure that you're muted, that will just help with bandwidth. That'd be really, really helpful. So as a starting point, how do we actually tell people the good news about trails and green space? How do we determine that value? How do we determine the impact that trails and green space make? And crucially, how do we articulate that to others, particularly those who make policies and those who deliver the funding? And one way that we can do that is obviously through the human story. The impact that trails and green space have on people's lives has been so apparent over the last 16 months. And we all can tell perhaps our own story and the stories of others who have really enjoyed getting outdoors, and that's nurtured their well-being. But it's also, I think, really important, I think particularly going forward, that we're able to put a quantitative figure on the value and impact of trails and green space. And it's not to say that the quantitative figure is more important than the human story, but I think the quantitative figure and being able to monetize value and impact is really important in terms of increasing our influence. And so today that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the importance of data collection and sharing in our sector's evidence. And we're also going to think about, the importance of how that's translated and communicated to help with decision making and to shape policy and practice. And hopefully, the work that we share on social trail investment is a really good example of that. So why did Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland decide to create an impact survey? Well, I suppose going forward for us, we're really keen to ensure that monitoring and evaluation is built into all new trails and green space sites that we develop. So this is going to be part and parcel of developing new sites and facilities. It used to be in the past that we would simply build trails and then we would just hear sort of anecdotal evidence of the impact of those, whereas now what we want to do is have a much more systematic approach to measuring the impact that they make on communities and individual people's lives. And I think it's also important to say that I think more broadly, it's important that we're able to quantify impact in terms of the monetary impact, the value that they bring to communities. And it's important that we're able to communicate that effectively. So it's those two things, it's building in monitoring and evaluation, but then also trying to quantify that so that we can communicate the value and impact more effectively. And that's important because there are so many competing demands on public spending. And so if we want a bigger slice of the pie, we need to be able to make a persuasive case for the value of local green space and trails in a way that is credible and in a way that speaks the language of governments and economists. And we're seeing this that increasingly across the visit activity sector and the outdoor recreation sector, that they're being viewed through social and economic lenses to determine their public value. And we see that particularly through the rise in people, organisations doing natural capital reports, where again, they're trying to put a monetary value on conservation, on recreation, etc. And I think it's important to say that while most of us probably at this webinar believe in the value of the outdoors and being active outdoors, there are many within policy realms and funding realms that perhaps don't have that same belief. And so we are challenged to provide evidence of the value of outdoor recreation. And so I think going forward, our ability to make persuasive arguments will be absolutely key to protecting, but hopefully also growing our resource base for outdoor recreation. And that will mean that we're able to offer more opportunities going forward. And it's also important to say that the impact surveys that we have developed is just part of a bigger evidence base that we're pursuing. And in the last sort of 12 months or so, we've been doing broader population-wide research. And one of the things that's really been highlighted through that Northern Ireland-wide research is that local provision is so important. And we've found that those with quality green space close to their home, they visit the outdoors more, and more importantly, they report better physical health, better mental well-being, and more connection to nature. So local provision is key, but we have to lobby for that. So in terms of just the key principles behind social return on investment, and really hopefully this webinar just articulates these two key principles very well. The first one is around not overclaiming. So the social return on investment framework is a standardised, recognised framework, and what it helps us to do is to ensure that the figure that we come out with at the end is not overclaiming, and the benefits are actually gained. And so hopefully today, as you'll see, the claims that we make can be stood over. And then the second principle is being transparent. So it's really important that you can show how you've come to the figure that's been arrived at. And there's no point having heroic figures with no explanation of how they've been achieved. So those are our two key principles. And you will see that with any social return on investment report, they talk you through the methodology, they show all the figures, all the calculations, and there's nothing hidden. And hopefully that will be shown today as well. Just to say then, just finally before I hand over to Duncan, that just to help us get to this point, we have conducted pilot work to develop our robust impact survey. And we did the pilots at 3 sites. So the first site was Darkley Forest, then Beldenhinge Rugby Trail, and then Bunkers Hill. And this was done earlier in the year. And what we've done is we've then went over those pilot studies and we've reviewed them. And we've also went back to our questionnaire and we've reviewed that as well. And we've cut it down a little bit because we've seen perhaps questions that weren't really overly useful in terms of the data that it was collecting. So I'm going to hand over now to Duncan, who's going to take you through the approach developed and then walk you through the social return on investment model.
Great, thanks very much, Elizabeth. Okay, so hopefully the slides have progressed to the next one. I've taken control of it. So yeah, before we go into I'm going to go into some of the nitty-gritty of how the approach works, the tool, as in the framework, which is available to you to use, the inputs required, etc. But before getting into that, just wanted to talk briefly about the approach we've taken to develop this framework, because this is something which needed to be bespoke to the requirement, and so we spent a bit of time, went through these phases shown on the screen here to reach the point we're at just now. So first of all, we had some detailed discussions with Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland regarding, well, what are we trying to get out of this? Which stakeholders are going to be in scope in this? And I'll come on to what we came up with and what we agreed on this. What are the positive outcomes? What are the social benefits that we're interested in? What do we mean by that? So trying to sort of just put a line around what it was we were aiming to measure. An important stage was we then did a literature review and we looked at approaches used elsewhere by a number of organisations. A few of them you'll notice there in Scotland, but not exclusively so. And so it was really best practice. We were seeking to develop an approach, as Elizabeth said, that would be transparent and robust, not over-claiming, but also practical for people to actually roll out, something that was relatively straightforward and usable and also affordable and possible within the resources that are available. So we looked at other approaches and best practice. We also discussed, as we were developing the approach, our ideas. We got expert input, so we spoke to people within Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland and within Sport Northern Ireland as well. We also looked at, there's a great deal of information out there online. We looked at resources such as from those published by Social Value UK, that organisation. And then, as Elizabeth said, we went on to actually pilot the approach. So an initial stage which was required in this case, we looked at these three trails, which Elizabeth just mentioned. We chose those partially because they were provided a range of different types of situation, and it would be useful to see how well the tool works in different places, but also because we had the availability of counter data on each of these, where there was fortunately an automatic people counter installed in place, so we had numbers of users available. That's not vital, that's not absolutely essential, but it's really helpful to have that information. I'll talk a bit about the data sources in a second. We then undertook surveys of users of the three trails. We also collated what we call proxy values. I'll come on to that as well in a second. And then we analysed and looked at the results, we reviewed the results, and we actually then fine-tuned the approach which we're now presenting now. So we've gone through a bit of a process over a period of a number of weeks, months even, in order to get to where we are now. In terms of that sort of scope of the work that we agreed up front, two key areas that we wanted to think about was, well, what are the positive outcomes that we're seeking to measure from this? And the diagram on the left sort of summarises the different areas that we wanted to cover, with different emphasis on different areas to some extent. So the key one was the physical health benefits. So there are a number of questions in our survey relating to that we're looking to get at that key measure, but also the mental health and well-being benefits. Environmental benefits, as in to what extent maybe spending time on a trail increases people's connection with nature, and we know from lots of evidence out there that can then result in greater levels of caring about the environment. Active travel, how do people get to the trail? Are they walking, are they driving, etc. So we wanted to be able to get at that. Education and learning. Also, we wanted to know to what extent people were gaining some knowledge from their experience about nature, about local heritage and so on, another possible social benefit. And tackling inequality, we wanted to kind of understand to what extent, who are the users of trails versus the local population, get the profile of that so we could understand to what extent the benefits were being shared amongst different social groups, in particular with a focus perhaps on groups of interest, so that we, in relation to tackling inequality. Also in their economic benefits, our main focus was really more on these social benefits that I've just talked through. We didn't see the sites that we chose weren't particularly being developed in order to, for example, drive tourism numbers or to get people coming from further afield than the local communities. Therefore, that wasn't a key focus on like the economic benefit directly, as in people spending money. However, that is an area which, if that was an objective of a trail, could easily be built in as well by asking people about their expenditure locally. But it wasn't in our piloted cases the key focus. It was much more on these other health, well-being, nature, learning benefits. Another key part of the scope was who we were interested in, the stakeholders. We decided we want to know about the benefits amongst the trail users, and that is probably always going to be the primary beneficiaries of an investment in a trail. However, it is important to remember that other stakeholders, other groups of individuals may benefit, such as volunteers who build the trail or maintain the trail. There are possibly local residents who don't even use the trail but benefit from knowing that it's there, that it's close to their home, they get a value from that, schools and so on. So there are other potential groups, but that was outside of the scope of what we focused on. We very much focused on the social benefits amongst trail users. Okay, in terms of the data inputs used, just sort of to run through these and then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of the analysis. So first of all, on the left, it's important to have an estimate of the total numbers of visits taken to the trail, how many times individuals are using the trail. Ideally, it's neatly over a sort of 12-month period. Ideally, that information can be obtained from automatic counters in place. These are possibly installed in a temporary basis or may well be installed longer term and useful in their own right just to monitor usage levels. However, if those aren't available, if that's not possible, it is possible to get at an estimate of total users by doing a program of manual counts where you count numbers of users on a weekday, a weekend, different times of year, and then you can do some form of grossing up to get to an estimate of total numbers of visits taken to the trail. And if you are using an automatic counter, just a little note in there, it is important to calibrate that so you're not double counting everyone that goes in and out, so you need to bear in mind that side of things as well. And these are sort of standard practices for using automatic counters, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with. User survey data. This was something that's obviously very important. We've developed a questionnaire through this process. That template is available for you to use, to download and use. It's got the standard questions that we decided were the key ones to use. And this records the key data that goes into the return investment approach, but also some other useful information which I'll come on to later on to talk about. You know, it's about some of the stories, so some open-ended questions, getting people to tell us in their own words the benefits to gain, as well as the more quantitative measures. In terms of the user survey, we'd say ideally get as many interviews as possible with users. A range of methods can be used. In the case of the pilot work, because of the social distancing requirements, we actually did it all online. We shared a link to the survey via local Facebook groups and different people. It was shared around. If anyone who'd used the trail was encouraged to complete it. But it could be done in different ways. There could be someone with a clipboard at the end at the trailhead, or paper versions. I guess it's about thinking about the location and the best ways to get as many people as possible to complete it. I've said there, ideally 100 or so interviews. That's a good sample size for something like this, but it's really as many as possible really that can be done, and certainly 100 would be a very good number to have if that is possible. Financial proxy data, so coming on to that, so this is where we move how our model provides a value, a proxy value for the experience of using the trail. And so as part of this process, we have collated a number of financial proxy values, which I'll show you in a moment, which essentially equate a visit to a trail to time spent doing an equivalent activity which you would pay for, such as attending a leisure centre, a sports club, or something that provides well-being or nature benefits, a sort of hourly rate of doing that. And that's how we move from numbers of visits to a financial value, essentially. And it seems like a fairly simplistic approach, but it is a commonly used approach. And the key thing is that we've collected these financial proxies. They are relating to, the cost to do these activities in Northern Ireland at the moment. In time, it may well be that these need to be updated in a few years' time or revised, but you don't need to collect that data. They're there and they're part of the framework there, and so can be applied automatically. And finally, it is a return on investment, so you need to know how much it costs to create the trail. So this would encompass the build cost, but also making sure to cover the whole cost of that. So any land purchase, for example, the construction right up to the point of opening it. And so what we're looking to achieve here is to get a return on investment ratio against how much it costs to create the trail versus how much the social value is being brought. And so we will, as I'll show you in a moment, have a ratio against that number. Okay, so I'm going to take you through essentially what we are providing in the pack that goes with this is the questionnaire, some guidance notes, and an Excel spreadsheet. And once you've collected your data, the Excel spreadsheet is there for you to populate the data that you collect. So I'm just going to show you 4 or 5 of the stages, a little video almost of each one. It takes a second or two to show. So the first stage though, and this is a useful one as context, I'd say more than anything, is you will know from your automatic counter or your grossed up estimates you'll have an estimate of the total number of visits taken to the trail, but that's visits rather than visitors, so that's quite important. So it's useful to get an idea, well, how many actual individual users are there? So, oops, sorry, gone forward one. Right, there we are. And so the way we do this is, well, we would input, and this is real data from one of the sites, this is the number of visits over a year. And then from our survey question, where we asked people in general over the last 12 months, how often have you visited the trail? And so at many of these trails, you will get people who are walking their dog several times a day or visiting every single day. So you do have a high level of frequency. So this question, this part of the sheet basically converts that into an average number of visits to the trail per year per user. And in this case, it's 88, which sounds really high, but that's actually, that's once or twice a week. So it's not really that high. And what this does though, is it gives you an idea, well, those 29,000 visits in this case are actually taken by a few hundred visitors, and that can be useful information in itself. Often you're serving a real core of not a huge number of people, but it's local people who are visiting a site very regularly who are gaining the benefits. So that's the first stage in this spreadsheet. And again, as you saw, they're very much taking the data that you've collected from the survey and the counters. Now, the next stage is what we need to do is take account of what the economists, I guess, would call dead weight. So what we're doing really is that we only want to apply a return on investment value to those visits that wouldn't have happened somewhere else if the trail didn't exist. So it's almost, we're just interested in the additional visits. So we get this result from the question in there, which essentially we have a set of attitude statements, and one of them is, if the trail didn't exist, I would probably do the same outdoor activity somewhere else instead, e.g. on another path. Now, if people agree with that, we kind of have to take them out of the equation, because we can't say the trail is providing them with additional value. It's somewhere they're going, they're getting some value, but they would have done it elsewhere. So we can't, this is all about being conservative about the estimates that we're taking from this. So that's removing the dead weight, as the terminology calls it. So that's got us to then a number of visits taken, which are because of the trail, the additional visits taken and activities taken because the trail was built. Now what we're going to do is start to think about the benefits that people are getting from this. So again, this is a case of applying some of the results from the survey that you've undertaken. So the questions that we'll use are, we have a question in the survey, which of the following activities have you undertaken, as you can see on the screen there. And so you could extend this if there were other physical activities. It's about ones which are like not just passive, not just sightseeing or having a picnic necessarily, things which actually involve activity. We also ask a question in the survey about asking people directly whether or not they would rate their health and fitness levels as better than before they used the trail. So it's a claimed measure, but it's a useful one to have. We also have a few questions in there which relate to the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer targets for physical activity which exist. So as many of you probably aware, these relate to how often people take part in physical activity and the level of sort of intensity of that activity. So we asked two sets of questions. One is just to get a general measure of in day-to-day life on the trail or anywhere else at all on the trail, other types of activity. We also ask it directly about doing the activity done on the trail. So we're getting at, through this set of questions, and this is the most detailed of the parts really, whether people are doing physical activities and also to what extent they're doing this in a vigorous way or moderate way or easy way, and how long they're doing it from. Now, we have the formulas with our approach basically to then convert this into some percentages. So again, we're trying to keep it relatively simple. So if I can show you how we populate these numbers then. Okay, so in this case, 82% of people did physical activities who visited the trail, 62% said their health and fitness was better, 35% in life generally were achieving CMO targets, but 10% were doing that via the trail. And what this has given us is at the bottom of the screen, we've got a couple of figures that's come out of this. The number of visits, the high level figure, the 15,000 figure, is the one which is telling us how many people did physical activity on the trail. We use that as a kind of high scenario. And then the lower figure is the number of people, the much smaller number of people who actually achieved the CMO targets through those visits to the trail. And that's the lower scenarios. So you'll see that those numbers filter through later in the process. I'll just move on to the next one. So other benefits are also very, very important to all of this. And so we have built them in. So it's not just about physical health. So we have one question which contains a number of statements, as you can hopefully see in the screen, which we ask people to think about their recent visits to the trail, to what extent they agree or disagree with the following list of statements. And it's a 5-point scale, and what we're interested in are the people who strongly agree with statements, so they're really getting these benefits from it. Now, these statements, quite a lot of work went into getting the wording right in these and making sure they work. Some of them are actually from models used elsewhere, which have been developed, over time, such as the "I felt closer to nature" statement. There is one that's been developed by Natural England for the Nature Connection Index, as they call it. So it's kind of been found to be the key statement which defines whether or not people are getting a connection to nature through an experience outdoors. And similarly, we have statements in there about which sort of relate to well-being and mental health benefits. The first three: cheerful and good spirits, calm and relaxed, active and vigorous. So we're able to measure to what extent people feel that they're getting this from the experience. And then there's a couple regarding learning and education, whether they learn about the natural world, whether they learn about local history and heritage, and then the connection to nature one. And then also we have some sort of social benefits, and all of these are interrelated, of course. So enjoying spending time with family, enjoying spending time with friends and other people. But essentially we include these statements in the survey, people respond to them, and then we take the proportions who state that they agree strongly. So in this case, we have 60% who agree strongly with one or other of the well-being related statements. 40% agree strongly that they felt closer to nature. 20% agree that they learned about nature or heritage. So we take the combined results, and then, as you can see, the spreadsheet then says, well, this is your number of visits, discount it for dead weight, what number of visits, is there a well-being benefit or environmental benefit, and so on. And then last of the sort of builds in terms of the data inputs pages, we have the final stage where it's kind of the financial inputs are going in. So up until now, it's all been about numbers of visits taken to the trail and proportions achieving different outcomes. The boxes in orange, these are our financial proxies. Now, you don't need to update these. They are editable if you wanted to update them. But essentially what we've done is we've done a trawl really to find suitable proxies from different places within Northern Ireland. So you can see we have a physical activity proxy, and that's a per hour rate, the average across a number of different physical activity type clubs, sessions, swimming, gym, rugby club. We have a well-being proxy where we've taken a sort of hourly rate for a number of different sort of alternatives, environment proxy and a learning proxy. And so we've looked at these different sources, we've had a lot of discussions, and we've come to these figures. The figure that you do need to input, though, in this section, the financial inputs, is the trail build cost. So that's the investment. So in this case, and it's always going to be a figure which, you may or may not have a precise figure such as this one, but it's, obviously going to be quite a large number which you input. And so that's telling you that's the investment side of things. So that's all of your data input now. Oops, sorry. The model then generates the figures, which I'll talk you through a couple of pages just to show you where we get to with this, essentially. So at the top of the screen here, so this is looking at the values. We're not coming onto the ratios yet, that's next. But the physical benefits, what we've taken here is, if we look at the column that says visits, these are the number of visits taken to that trail where there were benefits gained. And for the physical benefits, as I mentioned, we've split it into a high and a low scenario. So our high scenario is everyone who did physical activity of some sort. Our low scenario is people who did that at a level of intensity and frequency on the trail that they actually achieved the CMO government sort of recommended targets, and that's a lot lower number. So it's a real range, and we thought it's useful to give that range. We then have the numbers coming through on the well-being, environmental and learning benefits from the proportions that we've input earlier. We then have our average price per hour session. These are our proxy measures from earlier, and these equate simply by multiplying one by the other. This is the total value of these. And then we have below this the sum of these figures. And we've split it by high and low. Everything else is sort of the same, but high and low, there is a differentiator there. So you can see the total return for 1 year based on that high scenario where all physical benefits are taken into account, or that low scenario where we're just looking at the CMO benefits. That's for 1 year. So in 1 year, that's the return. But often these things, I would recommend you look at them over a longer period of time. So we've grossed these up to look at 5, 10, or 25 years. And again, it's a very simple, transparent calculation. We just simply multiply the 1 year by 5, 10, and 25 just to get to these figures. And then at the bottom, we have the build cost, which you just input. So how do we get to return investment? Essentially, we take the build cost and we take the return and we divide that by the build cost. And we've given here the 5, the 10, and the 25-year scenario. And so it gives you the different outputs which are possible. It's a decision really to make on, well, what time period are we looking at on this? This is up to you to decide. It's useful to calculate them all. The spreadsheet's set up in a way also that you can play around with different numbers and see the effect it has on it and so on, so that it is very flexible and very accessible to do that. So that's the quantitative part, and apologies, it's quite a lot of spreadsheets and so on. There is accompanying notes with this. The spreadsheet is designed to be very easy to use and transparent. Also, though, it's important to say that the survey questionnaire collects other measures. Some of these are used to go into that spreadsheet, but others actually we thought, no, these are really useful just to have anyway as a manager of a trail, of a route that's being used. So we have within there how often the users are using the trail, the activities they're doing, whether they're reporting an improvement in health themselves. So that can be a really key figure just in itself, saying 60% of people say that since the trail was built, they feel like they've improved their health. Whether people are socializing while using the trail, how close the trail is to home. So that gets us towards alongside the transport question, which is there, that to what extent people are walking to the trail versus driving, and if we know that therefore people are more likely to be walking to use that trail, a local trail opened, that will hopefully have decreased their likelihood to drive further afield, which they would have had to do before. The demographics of users. So we asked a number of key questions about age, life stage, gender, and so on. And that also gets that we can look at the results by demographic, understand the profile of who's using the trail, and you can therefore get hold of local population data, possibly, from census data, etc., and get an idea of to what extent is this trail being used by everyone or certain groups more so than others, help you to sort of maybe target how you promote its benefits. The rating of the benefits also, and rating of the experience and improvements that could be made is also useful in terms of it can be very practical to say to people, well, how good was the experience? And again, that's a nice result to have, it's positive, but also if there are improvements that can be made, an open-ended questioning can get at that and help you to understand what needs to be done to fine-tune the trail, to improve things, to make the experience as good as possible. Right, I'm going to hand back to Elizabeth now, who will talk through a little bit more about how the outputs are being used.
Yeah, thank you so much, Duncan. So Duncan's just took you through the very technical aspects of the framework, and hopefully that's just helped explain the methodology. If you do have any questions for Duncan, do throw them into the chat and we can pick them up later during the Q&A session. But yes, I'm just going to share with you some of the outputs that we've been able to take from the pilot studies. Because as you can see, sort of looking at spreadsheets, they're not the most exciting thing to look at. They're certainly not the most impactful thing. So what we've been able to do is develop the template for each one of our pilot sites. So on the screen, you've got the one for Bunkers Hill that's being developed. And you'll see there that we've taken or highlighted some of the key metrics. So here you've got a little infographic of a piggy bank, which illustrates that £1 into creating the Bunker Hill Trail will get £16 return over the lifespan of that trail. So that's a really key piece to highlight there, and this is a much more interesting way of articulating the value of Bunkers Hill as opposed to having lots of spreadsheets. We've also picked out some of the key metrics, so you can see the positive outcomes that we've listed. So you can see there in terms of physical activity, the 82% of visits involve physical activity. We've got 10% achieving their CMO targets through visiting the trail alone. And you can also see other ones there. So you get 40% saying that the trail makes them feel closer to nature. And then there's other key metrics that we've looked at. So proximity of trails to people's homes. As many of you know, Bunkers Hill is just on the edge of Castlewell, just slightly on the outskirts. So it's very close to where lots of people live. And hence you can see that that's represented here in the proximity of the trail to people's homes, and that most of the people are able to walk to the trail. And then we also have some qualitative statements, which are really, really impactful as well. So you've got one person saying, I find walking around the trail is a great stress reliever. It gets my children outdoors amongst nature and allows me to clear my head and appreciate our beautiful surroundings. And during data collection, we got hundreds and hundreds of completions, so lots of impactful statements. We've just picked out 2 there. So that's Bunkers Hill. Here's the fact sheet for Darkleaf Forest. And again, here you can see now there was a higher build cost for Darkleaf Forest because it's a bigger facility, but you can still see that over the lifespan of the trail, £1 invested, and that should say £1 invested will get £10 return. And there's a problem there with the infographic. We'll have to get that changed. Now you can also, what's interesting about Darkleaf Forest, you can also see that most people are having to come from further afield to get there. So 5 kilometres is the most prevalent distance, and hence why there's more car usage for people to get there to walk around. And then finally, I'll just show you the last one that we have done for Ballynahinch, Rugby Family Trail. So it has a similar return on investment, £1, gets £16 return. I think what's interesting about this one, so this trail is actually around the playing fields and then into a little wooded forest area. You've got 16% achieving CMO physical activity guidelines, and that's great to see so many people going there often enough and exercising at great enough intensity to really reap physical health rewards there. Again, it's a little bit outside of Ballynahinch, so most people are getting there by car. But again, you can see if you look at the bottom right statement, one of the comments is, it's a lovely trail in the countryside with views of Slave Crib, and it's great for running, walking with the family and our dog. And club members are very welcoming despite us not being members. So again, that's just a different trail that's obviously bringing lots of social benefits to the local community. So hopefully those illustrate what can be done with the findings and the results that come from the impact survey, including the social return on investment. In terms of the next steps and our future plans, as I said earlier, we will be rolling out this impact survey for all new trails and green space that we develop. It will just become part and parcel of what we do. So we'll be building up the data, but we're quite keen as an organisation not to just kind of keep this to ourselves, but to share it out to the sector, because we do realise that there's a real importance to build up the evidence base across all organisations and stakeholders. So we want to offer it out to the sector. And what we foresee that being is having a user guide that can be downloaded, a standardised survey that will be used across the board, and then the valuation spreadsheet that Duncan has just walked us through. And with that, what we hope to be able to do then is to collate findings across the sector, start to build up this evidence base, and then work together to disseminate the findings impactfully. And there's some key questions that I think that leads us towards. Number one is would you be interested in using a toolkit similar to perhaps what Duncan has shown today? I'm going to ask Kerry to throw a little poll into the chat, a link to the poll. And maybe if you could just click on that link, that will take you through to a poll online. And there's just 3 answers, yes, no, and unsure. So there it is, it's just appeared. So if you just click on that link, and then what I'll do is I'll maybe just get Kerry just to share her screen, just to see as the results come in. And just while you're doing that, we have a question in from Vincent saying, how have we calculated the lifespan of the trail? Is the calculation of social return on investment over lifespan based on a constant usage rate? We have, for the pilot studies and going forward, taken 25 years as a typical lifespan of a trail. So we assume that if a trail is properly built, it should last for 25 years before perhaps it needs to be rebuilt. So the results have come in. We've got 14 responses, and everybody is saying yes, you would be keen. So that's super. So that's really good news. Duncan, do you want to say anything else about lifespans and what duration you can look at? Because obviously you've got the 5, 10 and 25-year markers.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think it is one where I guess you need to sort of consider what you expect it to be, but the 25 years, as you say, is a time period that you've used as an approximation of the typical amount. In terms of the value, no, it's a really good point in that the figures that you input to the model, the approach is assuming constant levels of usage each year, and also that the benefits being gained will remain constant. It's really saying year 1 times 25 years that this remains the same. It is something which perhaps over time, if you have ongoing automatic counter data, for example, that you could use the tool to get an updated picture, I would say, or you might repeat the survey. You don't have to do it because that could become a sort of a big burden to have to do it all the time, but it gives you an estimate based on the best data you have. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point in that our usage numbers, for example, I think we took a sort of average because the counters have been in place for more than a year, for a period of time, a couple of years at some places. It may be things such as during the COVID period, you might think, well, is this typical usage or should we use it, you know, at another time when things have gone more back to normal? So I think you just have to make a judgment yourself and then input them to the spreadsheet. And that will, you know, the good thing about it, the beauty of it is that will allow you to see the implications of that. And it's kind of, there's not a right or wrong decision. You just have to use the tool as best you can based on what you think is typical usage.
Okay, fab. I see Lindsay Houston has asked a question there to say, is the toolkit something that can only be used for new trails or can it be used for trails that have been open for some time? Bunkers Hill has been open for some time. I think, just let me bring up what year Bunkers Hill. So Bunkers Hill was launched in 2014. As I think as long as you've got annual data for visitor numbers, this can be used throughout any stage. For ORNI going forward, we will use it a year after launch. That just gives us a whole year of visitor numbers. But then we can go back and revisit that trail in further years down the line just to compare with how it opened up, because obviously whenever a new trail opens up, there might not be others who know about it or start using it. So we can monitor things throughout the whole lifespan of the trail. There's a question there, maybe I will put this one to you, Duncan, from Jilly. So, do you account for maintenance costs of a trail?
At the moment, the way that we've suggested it's used, it's kind of with that focus on maybe a newer trail being open for a year, although as you've just said, it can be used for retrospectively almost. So we've thought, well, it's about the return on the initial investment, the construction, the building, buying the land, everything and so on. But that said, again, you could, if you've got a trail which has been open for 10 years and you know that there's a typical annual maintenance, you could build that in. So that means that your ratio would be based on both the build and the maintenance cost of the trail. Or if a trail has been there for many years and it feels like the build cost is in the distant past, you could base it the return on investment on the annual maintenance. So I suppose it's making sure that you're considering, well, what is it we're after? What are we trying to get the return on? The model will give you a sort of 1 year figure for the value gained, and suppose you then need to think, well, what are we looking at this value against? What is the ratio based on? So it's flexible in that way as well, I guess, you know, that you can certainly build that in if you want. But our initial thinking was it was more about that initial build for new trails.
Inga makes a point there that you could add in the maintenance cost to the overall cost. I think if you were very certain that your maintenance cost was X amount per year, you could multiply that by 25 and put it in there. I think though, for many landowners, they're not sure of the maintenance cost until they actually have the facility on the ground, and then they see what needs to be done to maintain it. I'm going to bring in, I think we've got a few people with their hands up, but I will bring them in shortly. I think Simon, you had your hands up. You had your hand up first. But before that, maybe Kerry, if you could put in another kind of link into the chat pane for our second question, which is what benefits require quantifying. So in our pilot work, we have looked at social outcomes around physical, mental health and connection to nature, learning, etc. There may be other benefits that you would want to include. Maybe it's around tourism benefits or more direct economic benefits. So we're very interested to see if the toolkit needs adjusting. So if you could just click on that link that Kerry has provided and just type in what areas or what benefits you feel that needs to be included so they can be quantified. And while you're doing that, Simon, do you still want to put your question forward? You can unmute yourself and put your camera on if you want.
Yep, hopefully that's me there. No, I was just a quick one regarding, I suppose, I noticed that you had 25-year value of what, 3.2 million or whatever it was for a £130,000 investment. That 3.2 million, then I was just considering whether that was a discounted net present value, or was it just merely a grossing up of the first year's benefit, if that makes sense?
It's just a grossing up. Yeah, I mean, we've kept it very simple, deliberately, just so it's very transparent and clear. And all we've really done is like the first year benefit and multiplied that by numbers of years. So it doesn't take account of inflation or any other sort of factors which you may want to take into account, but it's really just it's deliberately keeping it very clear. So, and I think in reporting this, it's important to say this is how we've come about it. This is how we've got to this figure, so that people are clear on that as well.
Yeah, and I think thank you.
If we can set that up.
Okay, super. Do we have another hands up from anybody? Maybe it was just Simon. So we can see the results coming through from the question there. So in addition to physical, mental health, benefit to nature, I'm also seeing here areas around the local economy and tourism, citizen engagement. So Duncan, I wonder, going forward, could these be added in some way? Do you think it would be quite possible?
It's certainly, it can be adapted and changed or added in. I mean, it's all been about a balance in that we wanted to keep the questionnaire short and focused on, for these particular pilot areas, the benefits that we were keen to measure. And I think most of the ones there on the screen are covered. However, yeah, as you said, sort of the tourism benefit, the economic benefit, there could be questioning added. I know in other pieces of work we've done, which are at places which are more about that, we have asked people to what extent they have come to an area specifically because of the site, because of the trail, and then we've also asked people how much money they've spent while in the area. So that allows you then to get at some measures which say, well, you get to know what proportion of people have come specially. You get to know how much their average spend is in the area on things like coffees, petrols, food and drink, guidebooks, etc. And then you can, in a similar sort of process to what we've got, do some kind of grossing up. I mean, it's keeping it basic. It's not an economic impact study, but it's giving you an idea of the amount of spend that's coming to the area because of the trail. So you've got some return coming to that as well. Some of the other ones there, I mean, regarding nature, well, the way we've done this is that you saw that we had some sort of attitude statements to what extent people agreed or disagreed with a number of different possible benefits. And then we look at people who strongly agree to them. So it may be that the specific things you're aiming to do, such as safety, where you could say that, you could ask someone to what extent they feel that safety was a driver, a factor in their decision to visit, for example. So you could get at that as well. And then you could apply that to your total numbers as well, just to get at a sort of overall figure.
I think whenever you see the final questionnaire, you can see exactly all the questions. We haven't delved into everything that's asked and all the data that is collected. What I will do now, because this probably flows on, is go on to our next question, which is really about how we will resource this, or how individual organisations will resource this. So if I just go to the last slide we were at, so how would it be used and resourced? So how do you envisage this being used and resourced within your organisation? Do you see it being internally resourced or externally? So again, Karen, if you could pop a little link into the poll, it would be good just to see how people feel about using this going forward and how it's actually going to be used. And again, I suppose that it does link on quite well to the last discussion, because various organisations will obviously have slightly different information needs. So there may be some organisations who need to collect some data around tourism benefit. There may be others who maybe need to focus more on nature in terms of people's connection with nature, their care for nature, their pro-environmental behaviours, etc. So it'd be good for us to know how it's going to be used and resourced, and if those adjustments could be made internally or whether you would need external. So I can see here that we have just 6 responses in. It'd be good to get a few more responses. So again, the question is, how would the toolkit be used and resourced? I think the question's not really clear. So really, I think what we're asking is, how would the toolkit, would it be used, yes, internally, or would you have to resource it externally? So if you're going to use it internally, you would click yes. If you're going to use it and resource it externally, as in bring somebody else in to do it for you, you would press no. And if you're unsure, do green. So we've got 8 responses, and 7 are saying that you could do it all internally. And that is actually the aim of having the toolkit, is that organisations do feel empowered to go off and do this themselves without having to invest lots in research and in researchers and going through and developing a whole new methodology. That this really should be something that you can pick up and use yourselves. The spreadsheets are all automated, and Duncan's done a lot of work there to automate them all. We've got 4 saying that they're unsure, and I think that's probably just around information needs and perhaps collecting additional metrics. So I'm just going to share my screen. We'll just go on to the final question. Thanks for that, Carrie. So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we're really, really keen to build up an evidence base across the sector, as opposed to kind of 1 or 2 organisations kind of holding this data internally. And there's a discussion here about how best to bring all the results together and to build that evidence base. And I think once we kind of know how we're going to collate the results, then later on we can have a discussion around how we're going to share them impactfully. So if you've got any suggestions about how we could collate the results, can you put it into the chat or raise your hand? We'd be really keen just to hear from you in terms of how you feel is sort of the best way to coordinate this going forward, and how we can work together as a sector to share research findings, to share learnings from various trails and Greenspace sites, and then to work together to really, I think, build up our lobbying capacity. Okay, I'll bring in Anne and Madam.
Hi, Elizabeth. Yes, Anne from Sustrans here. I was just thinking one useful way of using the toolkit was the information you have on access to the trails. You know, so where you have trails that are, you know, overwhelmingly accessed by car, that you could make the case using the information about the health and economic and mental well-being benefits to lobby government for better walking and cycling routes to those trails. So I recognise some of those trails are fairly rural, but you can see where trails are close to residential populations, the majority use walking as their mode of getting there. So I think certainly Sustrans would find that useful to build the case for improved site protected cycling infrastructure or better pavements, and even maybe shuttle buses from population centres to get to these trails. I think the case could be made using this toolkit. So yeah, I think it's really helpful. I'm not sure that's answering your question, but that's just one use that I can see of it. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really pertinent point, and it's an issue for Northern Ireland that so many people have to jump in a car. I'm going to bring in Claire. I'm also going to ask Carrie, actually, because as I bring in Claire, Claire's also recently done a blog post for us on people having to get into their cars to go for the simple pleasure of having a walk. So I'll bring in Claire, but I'll also ask Kerry just to pop into the chat a link to our recent blog post on that. Claire, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I suppose to answer your initial question there first, Elizabeth, I think it would be really useful to have some sort of like online or digital dashboard as opposed to just spreadsheets. And I know that takes it to the next level of complexity and lack of maybe flexibility for individuals to tinker with the parameters and so on. But ultimately, to simplify the whole approach, some sort of dashboard would be really good. But just to supplement then what Anne said there, and I'd written this down earlier about the dead weight, the sort of dismissal of that dead weight, people who go elsewhere already, and that we discount them at a very early stage, which I totally understand. You know, this is about simplicity and keeping it really straightforward and conservative, totally. But as this progresses and develops, I think, you know, we're doing a bit of a disservice there, because those people are potentially traveling, they're going elsewhere and they're potentially traveling further to do so. So perhaps a new trail will keep them closer to home. Even if they are driving, they're driving less of a distance. So there are those sustainability benefits that can be calculated. And I do understand that Sustrans, I think, has some sort of active travel calculator that is similar to this in a way, but focused specifically on active travel and the economic benefits of that. That might be an existing model that you can simply slot into this one. But there's also like social equity benefits to that as well. People who don't have access to cars and so on can benefit with, you know, having that direct access and not being excluded from that. So that was just my contribution to what Anne said.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Claire. Inga also makes the point that we could have an inbuilt report and then return it back, so that could become part of the pack as such. So not only would you get your user guide and your standardized survey and your spreadsheet, but also there could perhaps be a report, like a template that gets completed and then sent back. And then just building that, maybe Claire's idea of having a dashboard where then we start to collate these key findings, and then that could link off then to other templates that are there. So if you want to find out more about a particular site, you just download that PDF. So all these things are doable. Do we have any other suggestions? Because we've just hit 1 minute past 12 and I don't want to overly run too much. Duncan, do you have any ideas about how results could be collated in an efficient way? Yeah. And even perhaps in the next stage about how that could be disseminated effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of this sort of dashboard. Of this, you know, could move from being a spreadsheet to something a bit more interactive, and but obviously that does require a bit of work. But yet, I think as things stand, I mean, even if people were happy to, once they've completed the spreadsheet, got their results, to send that back to Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland, and then it would be possible for you to collate these results, you know, for different trails. And I think could be kept fairly simple, again, really essentially just the key measures, the key numbers, the ratios, but also some of the key survey results could be put together in another spreadsheet probably. But what would be the benefit of doing that is that would mean that you're building up the picture, but also you could over time have some benchmarks almost, you know, for, you know, so that someone using this model could also say, well, is this good? Is this high or low? And then over time, perhaps be able to compare their trail with one in a similar type of environment or in a similar part of Northern Ireland, that kind of thing. So I think maybe something, you know, it would require a little bit of work to sort of input the figures into something, but if it could be then shared, available to be emailed to people or downloaded, I think that would be a nice simple way of just sharing the results.
Okay, super. Well, in the coming weeks, I think the next coming week or two, we'll put information up on our website and out on our e-sign in terms of the next steps. I think this discussion's been really useful just to help furnish our ideas in that area. So there'll be more information coming out. The conversation's not closed, so if there are adjustments that you feel are needed for the survey or for the toolkit, do let us know. So whenever you hear more information, do feel free to come back to us as well. I'm just going to close up just by announcing just a couple of dates to put into your diary. So in terms of our training program going forward, we've got 2 dates in October for you. So the next webinar will be on engaging children with innovative approaches to outdoor play. That'll be a webinar on the 12th of October. And then on the 19th or 20th, I'm still just securing a date with Stephen Jenkins, who's really an expert in this area across Ireland and the UK. We'll be looking at managing visitors with dogs post-pandemic. And that's obviously a big issue for many of us as well. So those are 2 dates to pencil into your diary, and we'll get those sent out in an easy token up booking very soon. And then finally, just to say that the recording from today's event will go out in an e-zine as well. So you can watch that back or share it with colleagues as you wish. Also, make sure you connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn to find out about the latest opportunities as well. I think all that's left for me to do is just to thank Duncan very much for his input today. He really is the brains behind this, and if you do have actually any sort of further technical questions or anything relating to other benefits, do feel free to send them on to me. Maybe Carrie, if you could put my email address and Duncan's email address into the chat now, that would be really, really useful. Do feel free to send us any questions, and we'll do our best to come back and help you with those. But thank you very much for attending today, and look out for the e-zine that will come out probably tomorrow. Thank you all. Bye bye.